Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's Performance Assurance webinar. My name is Jenny, and I'll be facilitating today's event. Today, I'm joined by Anton, V, Nirav, Amy, Daniel, and Anna. And just before we get started, I want to go through some housekeeping. So we ask that you keep your cameras and your microphones off during the session. The event will be recorded, so if you do miss anything, there will be an opportunity to refer back to the slides and the recording. We will be using Slido in this event, so I will share the QR code with you shortly and put a link in the chat. There will be opportunities for a Q&A, so if you have any questions at any point, feel free to pop it into Slido. So this is the QR code, and I'll pop a link in the chat now. And just in the meantime, while people type in their names into Slido, I'll share the agenda. We have a lot to get through today, so I will hand over to Anton, I think.
So I think just to start, thanks for taking the time to attend this webinar. We really appreciate it. I think you've seen by the long list of things that we want to talk to you about that we're really keen to engage, explain, understand, and work with you in general. As previously, we've tried to structure our webinar around 4 key things we think that REC parties are focused on. The first being, what do I need to do? The second one, thinking about how REC's improving things for me, how my reputation is being protected, and do I get the service that I expect? Because all of these are fundamental bits of the value that you get out of the performance assurance service. What do I need to do, we assume, is the area people will be most interested in. So we're going to stop after we've gone through all of those items. There's 8 questions there because, you know, we're guessing that might be where the most engagement and interest and value might be for you. We do really value a 2-way conversation. I think this can't be one way, although with so much content, we will go through our slides reasonably quickly. Please do engage in the Slido, ask questions, and of course, like, this isn't the only opportunity to engage with us. So if something arises in your head later after the content that you've heard today, or you're not quite sure, we can always engage with you after. So without too much ado, we should probably progress to the first section, which, focusing on what do I need to do, is just a recap. I'm trying to explain a little bit clearer on how we approach risk monitoring and what we kind of do with the information. So I just hand over to V, who will take you through that.
Thanks, Anton. If we move to the next slide, please, Jenny. So, yep, as Anton said, we'll first start by recapping about how we approach performance assurance under the REC. So our approach for performance assurance, it includes detailed market monitoring over the various areas of REC. And in this approach, we need to reflect a few things. Firstly, the switching market in particular is very dynamic. Things change rapidly, so we need to ensure our approach is able to respond to that, and we can focus on areas that are emerging risks as a result of it. Also, unlike other arrangements, there's no clear target of what good performance looks like. So we need to be mindful of this when we're implementing our approach and respond to the emerging trends within the market. We also believe, obviously, that part of performance assurance is addressing party performance issues, but another side of the coin is also ensuring that the code, all the areas of the code are clear and there's no ambiguity, and ensuring that, all the various different areas of the code are working. So that's how we come up with our performance assurance approach. And within the updated performance approach, which we brought to you a few months ago, we're basically reflecting on a few things. So the rec arrangements that are a bit more stable since the code consolidation happened and CSS go live happened. So we've seen a lot of the retail risk drivers that we measure settle down over the last year. We've also developed a clear understanding of how performance works and how what the multiple initiatives in the various areas are needed to improve performance. Some of my teammates will talk about the specifics in a bit. And then also there's a huge amount of other things happening in the industry, lots of changes, etc. So we are cognizant of those, and we're making sure that any performance activity under the rec is mindful of other responsibilities a party will have. With that said, we review performance every month, but we only focus on key areas where there is a need for performance assurance intervention. And we engage with parties using PATS, the performance assurance techniques, where that's genuinely needed. So with that, if we move to the next slide, please. Again, this might be familiar to many of you. So this is an approach that we'd introduced at the last webinar, where we told people that we're moving away from applying PATs every month to a more quarterly approach where we bunch PATs together. Of course, we still have the option to apply PATs where something has emerged off cycle and there is a clear concern that needs to be addressed immediately. But otherwise, we have aligned our PAT cycle to quarterly, and that aligns with the Smith survey results as well, which are published. So the first cycle, we've been through it. As you can see, we're in March now. So we've been through this quarterly cycle once, where we've in February bunched up PATs for December, January, and February and issued them accordingly. On this slide, I would just like to highlight one key point. So this is our approach to party assurance. So a lot of our party assurance risk monitoring activity happens on central data from central sources. So parties may not have the visibility of the performance that we're seeing until it's reported on the dashboards. So therefore, that's one of the reasons why we've adapted this approach that allows us to notify parties when we identify things, gives parties time to proactively address those concerns, and where things don't improve, then we go in with PATs and ask for more information to understand what actions parties have taken in the months that have passed. Now, rec parties, I mentioned this is for rec parties, DNOs being an interesting rec party. So DNOs, we do measure their network ops obligations, but there's also the registration service obligations that are within the code. So we may apply PATs to the registration services roles where we see performance issues. That performance is measured through metrics that the DNOs themselves report to us. So we hope there's no surprises. So therefore, it's not necessarily, we won't necessarily engage with forums such as RIG, where we identify issues with a certain DNO's performance, because that would not be appropriate. So in such cases, we would directly approach the party, ask PAB for permission for PATs, as we've said we would, to make sure that our approach to PATs is balanced, and then reach out to the party directly to understand any performance issues. So just wanted to highlight that. If we move on to the next slide, please. Thank you. In the last quarter, we've had lots of queries around how our thresholds are determined. So we thought it'd be good to recap a bit about our threshold strategy as well. So as you can see on the screen, there are 4 strategies that we use for setting thresholds, and they depend on what are the behaviors we're trying to address or drive. First strategy is an alarm, where basically we think that the performance across the market is in acceptable bounds, but the threshold set so that we can quickly identify where things start to worsen. This kind of strategy is used for things such as rate of erroneous switches, rate of objections, withdrawal process, where we're saying it's not wrong to be using these processes. We expect the use of these processes to be within certain limits, but then if we suddenly see excessive use from a certain party, we'd want to understand what's driven that. So these thresholds, alarm thresholds, help us identify those cases. The second strategy that we have is where we have a clear intention to drive performance improvements. So rather than targeting all parties, we start with the worst performers. So the threshold is set so that it captures the worst performers in the market as of today. And as the hope is that we focus on the worst performers first, we drive the average down, and over time we can reduce that threshold to drive performance improvement in the right areas. This strategy we've used for areas such as switch meter reads, annulments, submitting invalid messages to CSS, where the parties receive CSS rejections, and also the ability for resolving erroneous switches in a timely manner. The third strategy we have is from the heart. So for this strategy, it's irrelevant as to where people are performing today. It's just at a certain level, performance or is just underperformance is just unacceptable. So that's what the level is determined by. These types of thresholds are used for the MPL updates between parties, the sharing of those updates and things like that. So that's the type of threshold we've used in these cases. And finally, the fourth strategy is where a threshold is not the right approach. Any failure is unacceptable. So we, in those cases, we say, let's not set a threshold, and all parties with exceptions should be engaged with to understand how we can drive improvement. Again, this is something we use in areas such as step escalations not taking place in a timely manner. Again, for things such as cross meters, duplicate outempties, etc. So hopefully that helps demystify some of the questions around like how thresholds are set and on what basis PAP determines them. I will now pass on to my colleague Nirav, who's going to take us through theft.
Yeah, thank you very much, V. So on the next slide, please, Jenny. What I wanted to talk about is positive confirmation and theft targets for the theft reporting year that's about to commence from the 1st of April, 2024. So this is the theft reporting year that's coming up. So theft targets have been published on the 1st of March, and they can be found on the PA dashboards. What I've shown on the slides is an example of what you should be able to see. So kind of at a very high level, you should be able to see your the current scheme year. Here it's 24-25. Using the filters pane on the right, you can also you have options to view last year's scheme year as well as the year before that. So there's three years you can view. And obviously you've got your party name, and then you've got your incentive pot. So this year the incentives pots are split by fuel type, customer type, and meter type. So one of the additional columns you can see is meter type, which splits the domestic customer segment by non-smart and smart meters. Then you've also got things like your market share information, and then finally your targets and your confirmed thefts. And then eventually towards the end of the year, you'd have your debit and credits. What I wanted to just highlight is some suppliers have engaged with us with queries on accessing their targets. So what I'd ask is to ensure all suppliers know about their targets. We would be grateful if you can take an opportunity to log into the portal and access your targets to confirm that with us. So effectively, please just send us a positive confirmation that you're able to log in and view your targets. We've got there has been numerous comms around this, so the deadline for the response is for the 29th of March. And if you can please get back to us using the inquiries mailbox, that'll be great. On the next slide, I want to now then talk about the current reporting year that we're in. So this is the 23-24 reporting year. I've summarized the key dates of the current reporting year and the actions that are required for the end of year activities for suppliers on this. And all of this information can be found in the Energy Theft Detection Incentive Scheme reporting timeframe. We recently updated that to provide additional clarity, and this is part of the clarity that we're providing. So as a summary level, what I just wanted to highlight was, so on the 4th of April, we'll be sending out comms to remind suppliers of the final submission deadline. So that's the 1st of June. And there's a query window that's associated with that ends on the 18th of July. So effectively, the action is to just submit data as per the normal requirements. Before the 18th of July, so this is before the end of the query period, we would ask that suppliers review their final results that they can find on the dashboards and provide a positive confirmation that the results have been reviewed and agreed upon. Or if they have a query, to please raise that in a timely manner. At the same time, if they can also provide us details of any portfolio changes that have happened throughout the year, or again, provide us a positive confirmation that you've had no portfolio changes throughout the year. Following that, so post the 18th of July, and this is subject to kind of the queries being resolved, the query window will then close. Suppliers would so in the post query window, suppliers will then have an opportunity to review any post query results or any amendments that have happened that reflect the outcomes of the queries, and again just provide us confirmation that you reviewed them, and please let us know if there are any other portfolio changes that you may not have already provided us. And then finally, on the 22nd of August 24, there'll be confirmation of the debit and credits positions of all suppliers in the market, and these will be published in the PA dashboard. And again, we'll just ask suppliers to review that and provide us a response back, or whether that's a positive confirmation that they agree, or if there's any potential queries associated with that. On the next slide, so I'm going to be changing topics slightly. So I'll be talking about the purpose of submitting reports for 1431 and 1441. So on the next slide, please, Jenny. We collect reports. The code manager collects reports. 1431 is the gaining supplier switching data, and 1441 is the losing supplier switching data. And it's effectively these two reports can be found in the parts of the performance assurance report catalog. Effectively, these additional reports that we collect provide additional information and another dimension on top of the Sentry source data we gather. And we want to use this data because we believe there's real value and benefit to analyze trends in the industry. And what I want to do is draw out the benefits and the purpose of why providing this data, and then for us to be able to analyze this would actually effectively help the industry. So what I've highlighted in the table is 3 areas that I want to highlight those benefits for. So the first is the switch source. So understanding the source of the switch will allow us to identify what specific sub-processor or actors can impact switching. So in the example I'm giving here is third-party intermediaries. So if we can determine what has triggered the switch, that can help us determine any kind of switching issues associated with that. The second row in the table, what I'm highlighting is the bulk switch identifier. So non-domestic suppliers can have single customer contracts that have multiple sites. For us to have further insight into that, to understand what the suppliers with those with contracts with multiple sites, we can focus our switching analysis at a contract level rather than at a meter point level, and that will effectively help us avoid false positives in terms of the application of PATs based on volumes. I believe this is a very very beneficial and very high level value here. And then on the third part of the table, there's an indicator for early contract exit. So what we want to see is if there's early switching where customers are switching early away from fixed term contract and understanding those trends that could indicate if there's a higher risk of undetected or potentially unmeasurable issues. And again, this will then help us in terms of prioritizing the application of any PATs that may need to be applied. we genuinely think that this information will help us understand where the code needs to be better and to focus on our work on consumer issues. So I would encourage all suppliers that are on our webinar to be able to review the PARC and then understand how best they can provide us the reports for 1431 and 1441. On the next slide, I'm going to, I guess, change topics again, talk about Data Cleanse Sprint 2. Yeah, thanks, Jenny. There has been communications through various channels for the Data Cleanse Sprint 2 for any attendees that also attend the RIG will probably know about the engagement that we've had with the industry to help us determine and develop the scope of the reports for Sprint 2, as well as the bulletins and the comms that have been and bulletins and the kind of the direct emails that have been sent out to the relevant parties involved. What I wanted to just highlight on this slide is Sprint 2 has started. Reports have been published in March and we're running for 6 months from March to August. The reports I've highlighted in the table are invalid electricity map ID. Target here is to reduce the POTS value down to 0. This is a continuation from the report that was in Data Cleanse Sprint 1. And the second report is energized no meter, no MSN. So an energized no meter serial number. Target here is to reduce the POT value to 0. But this will be excluding MPANs that have been energized within 1 month of the close of the sprint. And that's based on using the energization effective from date. There'll be an interim and a final analysis of party targets. So the interim analysis will take place in May, and the final analysis will take place in August. Based on that analysis, there may be PATs that are applied where parties don't meet their targets. And the last point I just wanted to highlight here, like I mentioned at the top of this slide, is I do want to thank all the parties that have engaged with us to help us develop the details of these reports. I think having that engagement with the industry has been very valuable in ensuring that we get the right scope, especially around the energized no meter serial number report. So I just wanted to highlight that. Moving on to dashboard enhancements. So I've got there's 2 updates to well, actually 3 updates to dashboard enhancement and whitelisting. The first I wanted to talk through was the dashboard enhancement plan. So we've got an enhancement plan for the dashboards. This was developed off the back of the dashboard survey that was carried out. We've listened to the feedback, and what we've done is listen to the feedback, analyze the responses that we've got, and then developed a plan to be able to address them. What I've highlighted in the table is our future enhancements. So to go through the table at a high level, we've got our one of the pieces of feedback we got was additional export capabilities. We can continue to do this. So if you do believe that there are areas of the dashboards that you as parties would like to export data, please raise that to us via inquiries, and we can then assess the applicability of whether we can include the export function there. There's the next enhancement is looking at data submission status. I'm going to be talking about that on the next slide. The timeline for that is from March. Following that, we're also looking at simplification of the dashboards and the layout and navigation. What we're looking to do here is understand and remove unused tiles, promote more important tiles. When I talk about tiles, I'm talking about the visuals within the dashboards themselves, and then just provide further clarification on to parties on risk drivers and understanding what the risk drivers actually mean. The timeline for that, for publication for that enhancement, is April 24. We'd also be looking at options to allow parties to take a single party view if desired. So this is basically where a party can view or would only be able to view or show summary of their own risk drivers for that particular party. And then finally, one of the pieces of feedback we got was to potentially separate the dashboard into different themes. So looking at theft and the core performance assurance related dashboards that we have. This is being reviewed and prioritized within as part of the wider portal changes, so there'll be more information on that soon. On the next slide, what I've shown here is the file submission tracker. So this is the functionality that should be released very shortly after the webinar. What I wanted to highlight here is you can find the file submission tracker if you go into the overall scores tab of the dashboard and then click on there'll be a new effectively a new button there that will allow you to view your data submission status. And if you click on that, I've highlighted that in the red rectangle on the left. So that's the overall score tab. Within that, you'll find the file submission status. So what the tracker shows, what the submission status shows is the current reporting month that you'll be reporting against, the file requirements, so whether they're conditional, mandatory, or optional, the file type itself. So in the screenshot here, hopefully you can see that on the screen, but say where I've just, because it's quite topical, where I've just mentioned 1431 and 1441. This supplier here has submitted those files on time, so that's great for them, great for us as well in terms of providing us additional benefits or providing additional insight and benefits for the industry. But that'll basically show the file names there, and then you'll also have your submission status. This is effectively a RAG rating, so you'd have green if the file was submitted on time, you'd have amber if the file was submitted late, and then you'd have a red status if the file had not been submitted. You'd also have details of the file name that was submitted by the party, as well as the date that it was submitted on. What I wanted to just clarify here is the status of required, status of mandatory is where parties are required to submit files. Where there's a file that has a status of conditional, that's where if certain conditions are met, effectively a file is also then required. So as an example, so for instance, 3040, which is the theft outcome files, they'll only be required if you're a supplier and you've investigated theft within that month. Due to the way the groupings and structures of some organizations and how they're represented in the portal may be slightly different. So there could be instances where you believe that you've submitted files that aren't showing up on the dashboard. If you do believe that's the case, please do let us know via the inquiries mailbox, because this is part of the, like I mentioned towards the bottom of the slide, this is the new functionality. So please do let us know if you do think something's not being reflected within the dashboard itself. And then finally, on the last, or my last slide, I wanted to just talk about the CSS P1 whitelisting. So we've received a list of MPANs that were impacted by the CSS P1 incident by the CSS provider. We're currently undertaking the work to whitelist any of those meter points that were impacted, whether they're erroneous switch or whether they're switch meter read disputes. So they'll be reflected within your own party's risk driver scores, and we'd expect to be publishing the amended risk driver scores by the end of April. That was everything I had. I'm happy to hand over to Anton.
Thanks, Nirav. So the next slides, just one is in response to some feedback that we received. So I think it is really important to highlight, we respond to feedback. So if you do have something, please raise it. It does help us. And that feedback was just to increase the comms around the annual rating. So here we are. If we just flick on to the next one. So the annual rating is a really helpful tool for us and for other organisations to provide an overall assessment. We obviously see a lot of things about specific parties, and that can't really be condensed as it's presented. So having an annual rating does help that. It also helps us look across the market to see where we think things are at. It's really essential that this rating is useful and fair. That's the key point, right? It has to be useful and fair. And at the moment, we're in the process of reviewing the criteria. The criteria get approved by the PAB, and we do recommend things to the PAB that they change. That's the purpose of that committee. But I thought it was important that we share with you kind of where our thinking is at, that we're thinking about this in the right way, and allow opportunities for people to raise questions on it or get involved. So clearly, any annual rating needs to be based on the information that we have as a performance assurance service on the relevant reg parties. We're reviewing the criteria of what has been included in the past and what could be, but previously it included risk driver information, theft performance, and performance assurance technique performance. Just the current thinking is we're minded to continue the focus on theft performance. Theft is a really important topic area that affects threats to life. So activity to identify, confirm, address theft is a really valuable thing that, in this case, suppliers do. But we think that parties have raised to us specific issues that do need consideration in other parts of that assessment criteria, particularly the risk data performance and PATs, not exactly, but kind of have some double counting. It's not an exact one-to-one double counting, but that probably isn't appropriate for them both to be in there. And given our enhancement to the way that we are managing this data and qualifying what information constitutes a real issue that V spoke about earlier, I think we need to review that. So we will propose to the PAB new and updated criteria. Clearly, they will be built upon what's happened in previous years, but we're minded to remove that double counting. We've committed previously, and those who remember us talking about this last year, to gradually increase the amount this information is shared. And last year, this rating was shared with a single organisation. So pick a party name, you could see your rating, and you could see anonymised everybody else's rating, so you had a feel for where the overall industry was. The direction of travel is to have greater sharing, and in fact that's one of the key strategies under the REC. So this year we expect that you will see your performance relative to peers with names there. There is a live discussion on whether we should go further than that, but the intention from PAB in the kind of longer term is that this would eventually become a publicly shared piece of information, and we will be working with the PAB to understand their appetite this year to get there fast, or to maybe perhaps do it more gradually, incrementally. I thought it was important to share these discussions were happening. We're reviewing the criteria. We've got that little timeline below. We're reviewing the criteria now. We'll probably be engaging with the PAB directly on this in April to get their steers on both the criteria and the extent of sharing. Irrespective of the decisions there, it's always really important that REC parties see theirs first, that there's that kind of opportunity to understand what the score is, to check if it is where you were expecting to be, and engage with us if there is, something to query, but particularly that you understand where you will be rated before that becomes shared with others. The intention is that market-wide score will be shared in August. That's the kind of timeline that we've got there. Just because of the feedback that we've had, we understand that this is something that people are particularly interested in. We will be giving updates to this in as many places as we can, but particularly performance assurance webinars. That seems like the most logical place. So please continue to come. We hope these are valuable events for you to get updates like this. I believe that this is the last slide in what do I need to do. And we had proposed that at that point we'd just take a pause and see if people had any particular questions about what has frankly been quite a lot of content.
We don't have any questions at the moment in Slido, but if anything does come up for our audience, they can just type it in and we will endeavour to answer your questions.
Yes, please do. But in this case, let's keep going on. We'll move to Amy, who's going to start talking about some of the things that we are doing to improve. Oh, Graham has raised something, if that's...
So do you monitor if MOP D0001 responses are within standard allowed period?
So we're doing work, which actually Amy will talk about shortly, to develop our approach on metering. We have originally, because we are required to do so, and we're required for the right reasons, focused on central data, including D-flows, in assessing MOP performance, or I think they'll soon be called MOAs, but I know what you mean. So when we went through that process, it did flag up a lot of false positives. And the reason for that is that many organisations have used internal systems. We've done specific investigations on that, but are reforming these around, we'll be reforming the information that we receive based on, in part, the information that Amy will impart soon in gas, but also the new arrangements that will be around, the new arrangements that will come with MHHS.
We have another question on annual rating. When you say that you're showing rec parties and how they perform against peers, does this include suppliers v suppliers and DNOs v DNOs?
The DNOs are a slightly different kettle of fish to suppliers. Suppliers are market participants only under the rec, whereas DNOs are both market participants and service providers. I think that's a valid question that we'll consider, but my assumption is that we would probably keep those two things separate.
Thank you. I think that's everything for the moment.
Great. So yeah, we'll run through some things on how we're trying to improve the rec for rec parties. Jenny, if you'll just pop to the next slide. So some of you might have already seen this content, but just wanted to kind of give an overview of work we're kind of doing in the gas mem space. So performance assurance team, we previously discussed this at the metering expert panel and the rec issues group in relation to data from CDSP reconciliation, the MEM RFI that we previously did, specific topic monitoring. Then towards the end of the year, we held an initial kind of discovery working group. So thank you for people that joined that. And these were some of the key themes that kind of came out of the session and has really helped us kind of shape our problem statements and some things that we're really trying to resolve and improve, specifically in the gas industry. So we're focusing on the gas market first. Reason being, we kind of know that the electricity is a bit more mature than the gas industry. So you can see here some of the key themes that came out were communication channels leading to missing messages and kind of rejections not being worked. The communications between customer appointed MEMs and how we can improve that clarity on that process, and then also addressing an issue surrounding age meter faults to really support accurate billing, access to new tariffs, and ultimately mitigate customer detriment. So you can see on screen there some of our proposed solutions. Conscious of time, so if you have any kind of questions on that, the content is there, so please do reach out to me. If we just pop on to the next slide, I just wanted to run you through kind of the work that we have done and our plan going forward for this engagement piece. So we kicked off interviews. We thought an interview process with parties on a one-to-one basis was an effective way to communicate with parties and really get as much out of the sessions as possible, so we can really take on feedback. We were planning to do just 10, but there was a real appetite for more parties to be included in, and we wanted to, you know, honor that. The parties that we are speaking to are a range of suppliers, a range of MEMS. We're speaking with the UNC and PAFA to really get kind of their input, and also Exoserve. So hopefully we're getting a really well-rounded view on our proposed solutions. I would just like to take this time to say, you know, a really big thank you if anyone's on the call who have attended the interviews so far. They've been really beneficial, and some great insight has been come out of those. To provide you kind of with next steps and when you can next hear from us about this is we will be providing a RIG paper at the next RIG and doing a bit of a playback on our findings from these interviews. Will then be based off the kind of conversation at RIG and getting people's views. We'll be taking it to our performance assurance board and getting their views as well before we kind of work with the change team, and it goes through the change process there. So that's kind of the work we're doing in the gas market, and hopefully, yeah, we can really drive some change and improvement, you know, for data quality issues, and also, you know, industry change on that front. So yeah, if we could go to the next slide, slightly switching it up on topics which I'm discussing here, and I just wanted to give an update on kind of what switching is looking like, and the current market. So if we could go to the next slide, please. So in previous months, switching volumes have been primarily driven by high volumes of internal migration, but we have noted that there actually has been a significant decline in internal migration activities in the past 2 months. So internal migration volumes have fallen from roughly, as you can see on screen, 1.2 million in November to 350,000 in January, roughly. And then from our analysis, we've actually seen a slight increase over the same period of actual switches, from 470,000 to 500,000. So yeah, there has been that slight increase in switching activity. On screen here, in the graph, you can actually see the month-on-month for domestic. So this is looking at the domestic side of things. Month-on-month, there has been a decline in domestic switching activities, which primarily has been, you know, driven by that decline in internal migration activity. However, we are aware from our engagement with the DCC that switching has returned to similar levels in February as internal migration kind of projects pick back up again. So yeah, I think if we can move to the next slide, we can just have a quick look at what non-domestic is looking like. So yeah, non-domestic switching kind of remains pretty consistent with prior months, as we observe volumes of non-successful switching outcomes remaining consistent. Obviously, you can see the peaks and troughs here. And we, you know, think that's kind of coincidental and does align with the renewal contracting times. So that's walking you through what the current activity in the market is looking like, and something that we do monitor, and we are interested in, and hopefully, you know, trends that we see in the market, we do try and reflect in our monitoring as well, and keep that in mind. I'll now pass over to Anton, who I think is taking us through lessons learned programme. Brilliant. Thanks, Anton.
Well, thank you. So this is definitely something we're trying to do to improve, firstly, rec arrangements, but also the value that organisations see out of this. We do a lot of work, perhaps behind the scenes, but also it's targeted in a kind of service delivery type way, and perhaps that can be improved. So if we just flick on to the next slide, the PAB have really valued some of the lessons learned work that was completed on the CSS P1, and I would really hope that industry did as well. They've also asked for more specific lessons learned presentations on key issues, such as ComCop consolidation program and other things like that. We've therefore put a paper together to PAB for this month, talking about how we might do this more in future. I think that we've proposed in that paper 5 key steps that we would need some help with, and we would hope that you would get value from. So the first one is identification of topics, which I'll talk about in a slide in a minute, but clearly we need to focus on the right things. If there's a big elephant in the room and we're not talking about it, that's not appropriate. The next one is lessons identification. Now, typically there will be one organisation within Rec Arrangements who is the kind of prime organisation who's been responsible for this activity. Now, if that's a whole market segment, then perhaps that needs to be led by a particular organisation in the arrangements. But we think it's most powerful where those who've been through the process, who've been owning that area, identify the lessons themselves, because those truly are the lessons that will get taken forward, really understood and driven to success. So we will be asking the relevant party, service provider, organisation to own lesson identification. Clearly, if something is important, we need to make sure that this lessons learned process is done thoroughly, and there would be a quality check by the Rec Code Manager and a PAB presentation to make sure that all the right things have been thought about and all the right future next steps are. The next thing, which is really critical, is we would ask that Rec Party or whichever relevant organisation to present those lessons, how they have understood them and what they're going to do about them. And the final thing, which comes back to the Code Manager, really identifying lessons is one thing, embedding them and improving the services, the performance, whatever the topic might be, is really where the value arises from all of this. And therefore, as we are doing on the CSS P1, we would track that actions as committed to are happening, that they are being implemented in a sensible way, that if there are some adjustments because people learn as they implement, that those adjustments don't lose the spirit of the recommendation, the spirit of the action, and that appropriate progress is being made. If we skip to the next thing, should this go ahead, we'd really need a lot of support in this, because actually this is about providing a valuable service to the industry. It's really important that we pick the right things. It's really important. Otherwise, we're going to have an industry presentation that people don't turn up to, and that isn't the best use of resources. So we clearly need to identify this from a range of sources. The first would be Rec service users, whether they're a party or not a party, and we will be looking for them to think about topics, either things that went really well in one little corner that should just happen, kind of be extended or embedded. Perhaps they're lessons that the Rec has done excellent and we should talk to other codes about, or vice versa. But also things that didn't go as well as they should have done or you would have expected, where performance needs to improve. So we would ask you. Clearly, we need to ask the 2 Rec service provider parties, DCC and Reco, for areas that they are thinking about have gone well or gone badly, or this would be a benefit for. Clearly, the Rec Code Manager is important in that as well, for a very similar reason. PAB members, because of their kind of cross-cutting vision for many things that happen in the industry, and their wide representation of lots of different types of organisation and interests, but also recent service improvements. So some of the things that Rec parties pay for come from, service improvements of the Code Manager, including our service improvements that come through the Forward Work programme, or Rec changes. I think these things are really important. So all of the different organisations in the REC arrangements. We can pick the most valuable areas to focus on and drive improvements in that way. So there isn't a particular ask of you guys. This is an awareness piece. But if we do implement this, which I'm really keen on implementing, I think we would be asking regularly in an informative, kind of easy way, are there any things that you would really like us to focus on? Of course, we would ask many organisations that, so you would have to understand that we wouldn't always pick the one that you would suggest. And we can't be doing one of these a month. That would be far too many. But actually getting your views is really important into picking the right areas. So that's all I wanted to say on the impending lessons learned programme. As it develops, we will obviously provide opportunities to either hear about what value it's derived or input into areas it should focus on. Go to the next slide, please. The next thing I do want some views on, and we will not just do this in this forum, we will do this in the RIG as well. It's about the voice of the consumer. Those who read the Performance Assurance Operating Plan closely will know that this is one of the activities that we've specified for this year. But actually getting the right views and approach is the key thing. So if you flick on, please. So the REC is about delivering really excellent retail arrangements, and fundamentally retail arrangements are about making things better for those interacting to get something done for the consumer or for the consumer. We actually have very little information as a code manager on what's working and what isn't. And actually we do a lot of work to improve things that isn't directly linked. It doesn't have that clear understanding. Particularly in my view, I think about performance assurance in the working week. We really want to make sure that we address problems for market participants, but also if there aren't genuine problems for the consumer, we want to make sure that we can help address them. The only real view we have on this is the smart meter installation survey that we inherited from previous arrangements. It does give some information. I wouldn't say it's perfect, but it does set a precedent that one of the ways that the REC can do this is to ask REC parties to conduct surveys. I think as a minimum, knowing that the SMIS survey, probably does have issues with it, we should update this so that some of those issues are addressed, while still retaining some of the value to the people who wanted this survey, particularly DESNZ. So we think there's a couple of ways we could tackle this. And you can see the big question, like, are we missing something? We don't want to run down into a particular solution if we've missed a much better one. The three options that I can see are update the SMIS. So essentially it's a similar pattern, but we'll have better questions. We'll make it more straightforward. We would do that through a REC change that would involve detailed industry consultation. Clearly we would have put energy and ideas into how the questions could be improved, but also we would appreciate, in this case, energy suppliers doing the same so that we can all get that joint goal. The other thing we could do is replace this SMIS survey into something broader. It would need to continue to have some smart metering content because DESNZ really value it. So that could be a broader metering survey, and a switching survey seem the obvious two interactions that relate to the Retail Energy Code that would be commissioned and run, in this case, by energy suppliers. Although, maybe there are other important things that other parties would have. We would say, well, perhaps you should cover this. That's not naturally identified through energy suppliers. The third route, if thinking about RECO as a collective action vehicle for all of the REC parties, would be to do something that's functionally similar but organised in a different way. So instead of requiring that different organisations procure stuff, we could say, well, perhaps we just do a central piece of primary research that makes sure it covers the things that DESNZ need, but covers other things, but is not directly driven and required on REC parties. So each of these would require party engagement and greater clarity. But before we dive too far in, I think we're quite keen to understand if there's anything, you know, is there an obvious fourth or fifth box that we've missed? Okay.
We do have a question at the moment, Anton, on the voice of the customer. The question is, I can understand you want to hear from the consumer, but who would be responsible for doing the activity?
But I guess that's one of the that is essentially the question that I'm asking. So there's two kind of greeny items. I would see those as the model that would be the responsibility of the REC party. And we should pick colours I know the names of. Maybe that's a reddy maroon. That other one, would be done centrally and with information then provided to the affected parties, perhaps based on some information submitted by the parties. You know, where have you installed a smart meter recently? I don't know. It clearly needs some development, but yeah, that is one of the design questions that is important to address.
Great, thank you. I think that's everything we have on that for now.
Well, you can always, if you have a better idea than the ones that I've put forward, please do shout, and we will take further iterations of this to RIG. If I just pass over to Anna from RECO, who wants to talk about improving the assurance service.
Thanks, Anton. Good afternoon. I'm Anna Weeks from the RECO operations team. Our operations team have been working closely with all the REC service providers to improve the services based on the feedback that we've had from you. V will be focusing next on some of the other service areas, so I'm going to be talking about the plans that the Code Manager and RECO have put in place to address the performance assurance area itself. So if we move to the next slide, please. We've obtained feedback from you in a number of ways, and we're always grateful for your comments because it allows us to take action to improve. Firstly, we undertook an exercise of getting your views last summer with the RECO on the road exercise. We've also undertaken Code Manager surveys and get direct feedback from you. And in the autumn, we undertook our stakeholder survey. And we've started to feed all of that into the improvement plans that we've developed with the performance assurance team, with some of those actions already taking place, and you'll have heard some of them today, and some, particularly from the stakeholder survey, that we're still working with the Code Manager on to incorporate. We've grouped these into themes, and I'm going to take you through each of those themes now. So if we move to the next slide, please. So first of all, in relation to communication, you told us that you want clearer communication and engagement in relation to performance assurance. So the Code Manager has been taking action by training the OAMs and the service desk so that more performance assurance related questions can be answered at the first line, so you don't feel handed off in multiple ways. As V was saying earlier, the PATs are now deployed quarterly, typically, outside of the areas that she highlighted earlier. We're improving the market entry training sessions that are drop-in sessions that allow applicants to get questions answered nice and quickly. And we're going to be trialling performance assurance check-ins so that there's a much more direct interaction with the performance assurance team itself, so that there can be more of a deep dive into each of the areas that parties are seeing, and you can answer questions in a bilateral discussion. Moving to the next area, please. So in relation to education, you told us that you wanted more education on performance assurance and to understand more about its purpose and its achievements. So the Code Manager's been taking action there by trialling monthly newsletters. There have been 3 of these so far, and there's currently a survey requesting party feedback on these so that we can understand if that's given you value or if we need to refocus these. The quarterly webinars have also been refocused, so obviously you've seen evidence of that today. It's it's particularly addressing those questions on what do you need to do, what is being delivered as a result of performance assurance, what's being achieved, and what's the purpose of performance assurance. There's been developing guidance, particularly in relation to MEMS, and we've heard more about the MEMS work there earlier, but there's guidance in relation to MEM activity as well. And one of the key pieces of feedback that we got is that there hadn't been enough interaction with parties themselves on some of the developments in performance assurance. So the performance assurance team have been talking about some of the trends and the activities that are being taken that will be taking place within the REC issues group, and making sure that there's some collaborative discussions with industry there before activity and performance assurance action is developed. Moving to the next slide, please. In relation to reporting, you told us that you want it to be easier to submit performance assurance data and for it to have a clear purpose. And you want to make sure that if there are any gaps in performance assurance data, that's being addressed. So in this area, the code manager is acting by producing how-to videos on the purpose of the dashboards, so you understand the purpose, an explanation of the reporting required and how to submit it. So all of those videos are now live and you can find them. That went out in a recent bulletin. They've also been implementing a streamlined performance assurance catalogue, which removes any of the reporting that doesn't meaningfully add value to the performance assurance process. There was a frustration by parties that they were being asked for lots of information and they didn't understand what it was being used for. So that's been improved, and that performance assurance catalogue is going live on the 1st of April. There's an escalation process that's going to be introduced where performance assurance data is missing. So I think there was a frustration that some participants were doing their bit, but there didn't seem to be action taken where others weren't, and that's going to be addressed. Where there are specific gaps raised, there'll be interaction with the industry to address those problems, and please feed back any gap areas that you identify to us. And there's work that's being undertaken with the portal team and RECCO to improve the usability and the user experience in relation to the portal for performance assurance. So moving to the last area. On theft processes, you told us that you want to make sure that the theft detection incentive scheme requirements are clearer and that there are greater controls put around that process. So in this area, the code manager has been acting by producing clear guidance on the supplier's requirements and the actions and timescales there. So you heard Nirav take you through some of that earlier today. There's also been a podcast that's made that clear, as well as written guidance. You also wanted us to improve the controls over the key steps for the scheme, and that's been done. And there's been improvement and will be continuing improvement on how theft data is presented through the party dashboards. So if we move to the next slide, please. That's been a whistle-stop tour of the improvements, but we're very keen to hear from you on whether these actions are making the difference that we expect them to be making. So please feel free to provide any comments either now through the Slido as part of your webinar feedback, or you can contact me directly, and I've put my email address there so you can contact me after the call. I'll pause there to see if there have been any Slido comments, and if not, I'll pass over to V.
Thanks, Anna. I don't think we've had any questions just yet, but we can revisit at the end of the webinar.
Thank you. So that brings us to the next question that we wanted to answer for you. Do I get the service I expect for the money I spend on REC services? To answer that, I'm going to give you an overview of how our service provider assurance works. If we go to the next slide, please, Jenny. I'll start by talking about the 3 buckets of REC service providers that are subject to performance assurance. The first one is the switching services. So the switching services are made up of the Central Switching Service, CSS, the CSS Certificate Authority, the switching operator. The 3 of these together are also known as the Centralized Registration Service, or the CRS. And in addition to these, we have the Electricity Registration Data Service and the Gas Registration Data Service. So all of these services together are the switching service. Then we have the inquiry services, which is made up of the electricity inquiry service and the gas inquiry service. And finally, we've got the various rec code manager services together. So looking at the switching service first, in the last year, we've introduced, so from 1st April 2023, the CRS performance charge was introduced. And in the last year, since the introduction of this performance charge, we have seen that it has helped us drive performance improvements, so proving to be a very effective measure. Another key reflection on the switching service itself has been that the service is more or less operating as anticipated. But in the last few months, as switching has started to pick up, we've started to see operational hours creep into the above peak volumes category a bit more often. So again, therefore, we're going to be taking steps and making sure our performance assurance is focused to ensure that we do have a robust service that can respond to increasing demand. I'll come a bit on to that in a second, but let me just cover the key reflections on the other two first as well. On the inquiry service, again, generally performance has been within acceptable limits. We've noted a few dips in performance in months where there were major incidents noted. However, that performance levels have bounced back quickly, and we've engaged with the service providers to ensure that lessons learned, that, as I was mentioning previously, that lessons are learned from major incidents and steps are taken to prevent those in future. There's also some metrics where either performance cannot be reported or performance remains below target. These are only a handful, but again, for these, there are work-off plans that are in place with the relevant service providers, and they are actively monitored by the PAB. Finally, the rec code manager service, again, positive performance through 2023. Out of all the metrics that we measure across the various services, 97% of those either met or exceeded expectations. Got some examples here. All accession and market entry management metrics were achieved at 100%. All training satisfaction score metrics where the target is of 75%. The code manager services achieved aggregate score of 98%. Help desk satisfaction score, again, where the target is 75%. The overall aggregate score has been 90%. So all of that's very positive. In areas where we do recognize improvements needed, there are improvement programs that are running. And like areas such as change, technology, user experience, and again, these are actively monitored by the PAB as well. I'll quickly take us through some of the trends that we've seen. So Jenny, if we move to the next slide, please, thank you. So this chart basically shows us the overall performance of all rec services that I've mentioned previously. And we've seen that generally the average performance across the year has been met 98% of times. Times when I mentioned we've seen dips in performance, those have been when it's coincided with major incidents. Again, as you can see from the graph, it's bounced back again the following months quite quickly. Again, the graph starts at 90%, so the lowest I think that we can see in the graph is still at 92%. So yeah, and that was only in 1 month of the 12. If we go to the next one, rec service availability. Now, again, depending on which rec service we're looking at, the availability targets vary. Some of them, the lowest target is at 99%, with the highest target being at 99.75%. Broadly, these have been met throughout the time, and as you can see from the graph, service availability generally is looking good. If we go to the next slide, please, Jenny. Thank you. So again, to the point that I was mentioning previously, that as we've seen an uptick in switching volumes, we've seen a few hours creep into that above peak category. So if you see August through to November, the tiny little red bit on top of the bar charts, that is basically what's depicting that's happened. Again, actions are being taken to ensure that we've got monitoring measures across all hours, and we are the service is responding to the changing demand. So again, just quickly wanted to touch on that. And this with the operational performance and the volumes, and that will remain a focus in the coming months for us as we see switching behaviors change. If we go to the next slide, please. Again, user support has been a key area where we have applied interventions in the last year. We have seen that there has been an improvement in the user support response metrics that we measure. There's still more to be done on the resolution time SLAs, but again, this is an area where we continue to focus on, and you'll see hopefully more improvement, and the graph will trend in the right direction. So, yep, that's a quick overview of service provider performance. I don't know if there's any questions, Jenny. If not, I will hand over to Daniel, who's going to tell us how we are protecting your reputation.
Awesome. Yep. Thanks for that, V. So as you mentioned, I'm going to talk through the escalations process and how that helps to protect your reputation. So there are two key elements here to protecting your reputation. So firstly, as a REC party or non-party REC service user, you will have obligations and responsibilities under the REC, and you want that assurance that everyone is playing by the same rules, everyone is meeting their obligations under the REC, and that this is being monitored to help mitigate those key retail risks. And secondly, where there are operational disputes, you'll have the comfort that there is a fair, proportionate, and effective escalation route. So if we can please move on to the next slide, I just want to go over what that escalations process is. So firstly, for operational disputes set out in the REC, escalations will first go to the code manager for review, and these can be raised by any party through the appeal and escalation form on the REC portal. Secondly, the code manager is responsible for receiving and managing these escalations. This will include seeking further information from the appealing organisation or any other relevant stakeholders to give further context and evidence for the escalation case. Thirdly, depending on the nature of the case, the code manager may decide to escalate to the PAB for resolution. In this case, the PAB will then determine what the outcome of the dispute should be, including any resulting actions that should take place to resolve the dispute. In either case, fourthly, the code manager will communicate the decision on how to resolve the operational dispute by notifying the impacted parties directly. Finally, if the raising party is not happy with that proposed resolution, they do have the right to appeal the decision, which, if we can please move on to the next slide, Jenny, we will now go over. So firstly, if you disagree or would like to raise a query in relation to a decision made by the code manager or PAB, the first thing you should do is get in contact with the code manager to resolve the issue. Then, if you're still unable to resolve your query or are still dissatisfied with the decision, you can raise an appeal. The routes for appeal will depend on the nature of the disputes, and we've included the appeal routes and timescales in a table on this slide for future reference. So that was a bit of a whistle-stop tour on escalations. Now, I'd usually say if you have any questions, please do let us know. But I think we're actually moving on to the Q&A portion of the webinar now. If I sort of pass back to you, Jenny.
That's right. Thank you, Daniel. So yeah, I guess the question is, are there any questions that you have for our presenters? We do have a comment from Shane. Great slides on activity in the market. Will be interesting to see how it's used in the future. So thank you, Shane. Other than that, do we have any questions on any of the topics our presenters have covered today? I think maybe we can take silence as golden. Right, well, if you do have any questions, feel free to reach out to us and we'll endeavour to answer your questions after the webinar. So I guess that brings us to the end. Thank you everyone for attending. We hope that you found this useful. Just before you go, we do ask that you complete a feedback form for us, as it helps us understand what we've done well, what you found useful and what we could improve. And yeah, thank you, everyone.